Welcome to Cherokee Country. We are here in the Southern Appalachians, one of the richest areas of plants and trees on the earth. The Cherokees were here for over 10,000 years, living in harmony with nature and growing crops of corn, beans, pumpkins, and squash. And they collected wild plants for food and medicine. Come, join me as we explore native trails, searching for wild, edible, and medicinal plants. Hey, here's a very important plant. This is one of the best antibiotics that are found in nature. The botanical name of this is Usnea, U-S-N-E-A, and the common name is old man's beard. You can see it looks like a beard almost. This is epiphyte. It lives off the air and the dust that flows through the air. It gets its moisture from rain and mist, clouds coming through the mountains, and it's known to be effective in killing the microbes of TB. And so this was probably a cure for TB when they were using other methods years ago. And one of my experiences with this some time ago was I was cleaning a window and breathed some black mildew spores. And within a couple of hours I started feeling tickling sensation in my throat, coughing. And so knowing that I was infected with the spores of this mildew, which can lead to pneumonia, I knew what would fix it up. So I let it go for 3 days just to see how far it would go and what the effects would be. Then on the third day I went out in my yard and got a piece of this off of a large pine tree, just as you see it here. And this also grows on limbs and twigs, and usually hangs. Sometimes it's just beginning, so it's a little tough on the limb that's growing up, and eventually it starts hanging. And so on the third day I cut up some of this with a pair of scissors and brewed a heaping teaspoon of this in a cup of tea, drank it, and the next morning the mildew was wiped out completely. So this shows how effective this is. Okay, one sure way to identify old man's beard is the color. It's usually a light green like this, a grayish green, and sometimes it could be a bluish green. And one of the identifying factors of this plant is that down in the center there's usually this white filament that's very tough. And when you're cutting this up, you'll see that white filament. If you strip everything away, you'll see that white filament there. And that's one of the identifying marks of this plant. Okay, bloodroot is known to be slightly toxic, and so it's not to be taken internally unless you really know what you're doing. And this is true with a lot of plants. Generally, you use plants that are known not to be toxic. For each plant that has a medicinal use, there's probably 2 or 3 other plants that have a similar effect, sometimes a stronger effect. And so whenever possible, you choose a plant that doesn't have toxic qualities, and this way you'll know that you're not using something that you may overdose on. And it was used externally for poison ivy. Okay, to use this plant for poison ivy, you dig up the roots. And this is a rare plant, so you would only take roots from this where there's lots of the plants around. And you just pick the roots, wash them off, crush them up, and then spread the juices of this over your skin for the poison ivy. Here's an interesting plant. This is called mayapple, the common name. It's also known as mandrake. And in the plants where two leaves come up, there's usually a flower later in the spring. This is the early spring way that it looks. And the leaves will become much larger than this and will stand out like an umbrella. And when it blooms, it has a flower about this big around with creamy white petals and a yellow center, and there will be a fruit appear on that later on in the summer. And the fruit is edible. That's why it's called mayapple. And it's very delicious, a little bit different than any apple you've eaten, but still good and sweet. Okay, this plant grows in deciduous woods that are partially shaded. And during the early spring, it does get a little bit of sunshine, but after it blooms, it's normally in shade. And this plant grows in most woods of that type in the mountains and lowlands in this kind of terrain in most of the southeastern states. It's a very common plant, and as you can see, it normally grows in a patch like this because it has root structures that spread, and so the plant continues spreading around, and there are patches that are like 10 times this big in some woods. Okay, this is yellow root. This is in its early spring stage, and you can see the blooms hang down, and they're pale purplish, but not brilliant colors. And later on, it'll have seed pods on it. And yellow root is used for mouth and stomach ulcers. It has antibiotic and anti-inflammatory properties. And the root also is used as a fabric dye for yellow colors. And it has a little bit of pain-killing effect. And so a lot of people would chew the root for sore tooth effects to help stop the pain. And so it's a very well-known plant and usually grows along stream banks and moist areas where wet weather washes come down the mountains. And you can see this is the root, and this is where it gets its name. It's very bright yellow, and the Indians would use this for a dye, to dye some things. And they would also take a piece of this root and hold it in their mouth for toothache, and it's a mild painkiller. But you can see the brilliant yellow. Here we have pokeweed. This is what Southerners call Polk Sallet, and they pick it and make a greens from it. This is the way poke looks when it grows up a little bit, and this plant can get 6-7 feet tall and become a really big plant. It usually has these typical red stems. It'll have white blooms later in clusters, and then that will change to little green berries and eventually become the deep blue or purplish pokeberries. Here's the poke again in a larger stage. You can see it's starting to put out the little white blooms. These will get longer, larger, and as you can see, it's branching out, and normally there's a little bit of a reddish tinge, sometimes purplish along the stems. Okay, this is a small yellow buckeye tree. You can see it has sets of 5 leaves that radiate out from a center point. This is the early spring stage, and you can see some red sepals have fallen away where it sprouted out. This was the original buds, and this plant grows into a very large tree. And of course it has the buckeyes, the nuts on it, and the wood from this is used for carving and used for some medicinal purposes, but it's a slightly toxic plant, and so I wouldn't recommend using this unless you know exactly what you're doing. But a very beautiful plant, and has clusters of blooms later that are yellowish, and so it makes, with the large leaf structure, makes a very good shade tree. And a lot of wood turners use buckeye because it has very interesting colors in the wood from spalting, and it's a hardwood and related to the horse chestnut. This is the spice bush, also called sweet scrub. See the deep purple flowers and the shiny leaves. And you can scrape the bark from this plant and make a tea from it that's spicy and quite delicious. It's used for stomach effects since it's an aromatic. Okay, I'll show you a sample of the real Solomon seal. There's one located right over here. This is Solomon seal, and unlike false Solomon seal, which has flowers at the tip of the plant, this has them hanging from the main stem underneath, and these change later into blue berries, which are edible. And the plant gets its name from the corm at the base, which is not a root, but a corm. And it gets its name because it has a pattern on the root that looks like a seal, like you seal wax on a letter with. This is the wild multifloor rose. These grow in the Southern Appalachians in various areas, usually at high elevations, and some are colored pinkish like these, some are white, and some are a deeper pink. But they have that great rose smell, and then later on in the end of the season they have the red rose hips that are small but still loaded with vitamin C.
Here's some wood sorrel, and this is an example of something that we had in our salad earlier. Very yummy. This is sweet yellow clover here, and this is something else that we had in our salad. And you can eat the bloom here, and you can also eat these tender leaves here. And this is an example of what we had in our salad, and it has a lot of vitamin C in it.
This is an example of how greenbrier looks in the wild. This is the new shoots coming out. You can tell by the very shiny leaves and the little tendrils that hold on to things as it crawls up trees and other things. And this is quite delicious, nutritious, and this is what was in the salad, one of the ingredients. A nutty, tart flavor, and after it gets past this point, the stem becomes hard, tough, and the shoot becomes more bitter. So you got to get them while they're in this young stage. Here's a familiar plant that everybody knows about. This is a young blackberry plant coming up. This is the way it looks early in the spring, and of course blackberries make excellent jam and jelly. And the shoots of this plant, like right here, are edible and can be used raw in salads or cooked in soups. And also the young leaves can be picked and dried and used to brew a tea that has a slight blackberry flavor to it. But again, a very interesting plant, and the natives knew that when this plant is up and just before it starts to bloom, we have a seasonal effect called blackberry winter, in which there's usually a cool spell at that time of the year when they start to bloom. And so this plant has a little bit to do with the weather, and the same with dogwoods. When they start to bud out, we have a cool spell usually at that time. And of course that's called dogwood winter. And so it shows how some plants in their season have a common effect that has to do with the weather. This is some blackberries in full bloom. It's also a member of the rose family, and you can pick the young leaves when they're tender, dry them, and use them to brew blackberry tea. Of course, the berries get ripe later on in the season. Good for jams, jellies, blackberry wine, you name it. Here's an interesting bush. This is called bearberries, and also commonly known as buckberries. The bears love to eat these. This is in the bloom stage. Later on, this will have large berries about the size of the tip of your little finger, sometimes larger. And they're good for pies. They have a tart, sweet taste between cherries and blueberries. This is a sourwood tree, a small stunted example. You can see the twisted effect of it. This is typical of sourwood trees. The upper limbs move a lot back and forth, have a twisted effect. If you taste the leaf, you'll find that it has a tart flavor, almost lemony, and this is what sourwood honey is made from when it blooms. These are agaricus mushrooms called meadow mushrooms, and there's more than one or two species of these. These are the white cap variety, and these are delicious. These are the same type you buy in stores, but they grow out in the wild, and we can cut these off. You see they haven't opened up completely yet, and there's still fat caps. Okay, this is the elderberry bush. These usually stay small. It doesn't get up to tree size. This is in the bloom stage. Later on it'll have berries form on this, dark red, and they're used for elderberry jams, jellies, and elderberry wine, which is a very famous tasting wine. And you can take sections of these blooms like this and dip them into pancake batter, a light pancake batter that's been sweetened, and you can either saute these or bake them, and they make very delicious fritters. So this is a multi-use plant, and of course these are very fragrant, smell very delightful, and when you make fritters from them, this flavor comes through in the fritter. Okay, here's some members of the mint family. This is spearmint. You can tell the difference between it and peppermint, which is right over here. Okay, this is the peppermint here, with the purplish tinge on the stems. That's one way to identify it. And these grow usually along streams. They like wet areas, and you can find them in full sun or in partial shade. Some people prefer peppermint over spearmint. It's more well known and is used more than spearmint as a flavoring. Okay, this is mullein. You can see it's easy to identify by the fuzzy leaves. This plant grows up, forms a bloom stem that can get up to 6 feet tall, and it has little yellow flowers on it. The Indians would use leaves from these, cut them out and put them in their moccasins as a cushion. And so that was one use. This is also used for lung ailments. You pick the leaves and dry them, and they can be either smoked or made into a tea. But it's very good for the lungs and bronchial area. And also it's a beautiful plant. When this spike comes up and it's full of little yellow blooms, it makes a real nice garden plant. As you can see, the horses are trying to get into this act. This is old paint, and he lacks a lot of attention. This is sassafras, forms a large tree, the one up above here. This is one of the only trees that has 3 different types of leaves. This one has 3 lobes. Here's one with 2 lobes. And then there's leaves that have a single lobe. And so that's one of the ways to identify sassafras. And of course, root beer was where the flavor of sassafras came in many years ago. And this is some sassafras roots. It has some reddish areas on the outer bark, and it's the outer bark that is used to make sassafras tea. Just boil the roots for a while, a few pieces of root, and the tea will turn reddish brown like root beer, and it's delicious. Has saffrolls in it, and it's a blood cleanser and very delicious tea also. And also the young leaves of sassafras is picked and dried and crumbled to make filet, which is used to thicken soups by the Cajuns, like in New Orleans. So when you have filet gumbo, the gumbo or thickening of the soup is made from dried sassafras leaves. A lot of people don't know that, but this is filet. This is sheep sorrel. It's a small plant. You can see the leaves are almost arrowhead shaped with 2 little tips at the base of the leaf. So this plant has a tart taste. If you taste it, chew one of the leaves. It has lots of vitamin C in it, and it's used in combination with other herbs by the Cherokees and some other native tribes as a cure for cancer. The other herbs that are used in combination with this for cancer is turkey rhubarb root, burdock root, and slippery elm bark. Those four are combined together to form a tea, and was taken twice daily. Sheep sorrel can be found out in open fields, in sunny areas, along roadsides, and usually in sunny areas, rarely in shade. And it spreads along the ground by underground root system, and so therefore it's usually found in patches. This is burdock root, the burdock plant. This will come up a little bit further and later have clusters of little purple blooms on it, and then later the seed pod forms, which gives it its name. It has burrs on it, and the seed pod with the little hooks which catches on animals and people's clothing was where the man got the idea to invent Velcro. Okay, you can tell by looking at the leaves how to identify burdock. It's soft, it's matte, not shiny, and the underside of the leaf has a whitish effect between the veins. And you dig up the roots of this plant while it's in bloom, and the roots are used as a blood cleanser and in one of the cancer cures that the Indians used, the 4 different herbs, and this is where the burdock root comes from. This is field sorrel here. You can see the flowers are lighter in color, whereas this is buttercup. The petals are shiny, brighter yellow. This one is toxic, this one is edible, and that's the difference between the two. This is one of the high bush blueberries. You can see it has green berries on it, not quite to the ripening stage yet. Very delicious when ripe, and very healthful. A lot of people eating blueberries now for the antioxidant effect. Okay, what a lot of people don't know is the leaves are also medicinal. You can pick the fresh young leaves and make a tea from them, and it's very good for your pancreas and kidneys. It's a cleanser, and so nowadays a lot of people are having blueberry leaf tea for its health reasons. Blueberry leaf tea may be a possible help in treating diabetes. This is skullcap. This is a nervine plant. The leaves are made into a tea and drunk for its calming effect, and this is also combined with valerian root and catnip also. This is jewelweed. It's also called touch-me-not because of the way the seed pods explode when you touch them. Of course, that is to scatter the seeds. This will have little orange blooms hanging about on it later on, and that's another way to identify it, but it's related to the impatiens plant. And jewelweed it's called jewelweed because after a rain the drops of water settle on it and they don't spread, they just sit there and they look like jewels on the leaves, and that's why it gets its name jewelweed. But this is one of the best plants to use for poison ivy, stinging nettle, spider bites, bee stings, and some skin conditions. Crushing the leaves and stems to make a poultice, you apply this to the spider bites or poison ivy, and it works instantly on stinging nettle. Takes a little bit longer for poison ivy, but this was used recently to treat brown recluse spider bite, and a poultice was applied to the area for a couple of hours, and the next day there was a very big improvement, and a couple of days later it was almost gone, the effects from the spider bite. Here's a bunch of jewelweed growing along a spring flow embankment. This is where it typically is found. It likes cool, moist areas, and it can grow in quite large patches. In some places it covers the ground. And one good thing about it, it's usually found where there's stinging nettle or poison ivy, handy for treatment. Okay, we're going to cut some jewelweed to make a poultice with. Here's some young plants. Collect a few of them. And with this, we're just going to chop it up and put it in a blender and use the quick and easy way to process it. Okay, first we're going to chop this jewelweed up into some small pieces using a pair of scissors. Put it in the blender. Put a little bit of water in it to help it work. Okay, we situate our blender, top on. This is going to be loud. So after you've blended this, the jewelweed leaves and stems down to a certain point where they'll stick to a surface. Then you just take some out. For instance, you're putting poultice on your wrist for a spider bite. You just dip some out like this and apply it. Squeeze it down on the area and add a little bit of water to it while you're blending so it'll have more moisture. And then you can cover this, wrap it with a piece of plastic to hold it in and keep the moisture in, and leave on for a spider bite close to 40 minutes to an hour. And then you remove it, make another application, leave it on for about the same amount of time, and your spider bite, regular common spider bite, which would have a small amount of swelling, will probably be very insignificant at that point. And that's the process. This is an edible plant that everybody likes. This is raspberry, and you can identify it by the whitish effect that's on the stems, and the leaves are also very white underneath, and that's one of the identifying factors for raspberry. This is one of the black variety. You see some are getting ripe here, some are still in the red stage, and then here's another variety nearby. This is the golden yellow raspberry. The ones that are ripe have almost an orange-like tint. And again, these have the white underneath the leaves, although it doesn't have the same white markings on the stem. This stem is a little bit of a purplish color. Okay, the raspberries are good to eat for jams, jellies. Also, the red raspberry is another species that we don't have a sample of here, but the raspberries are very brilliant red when they're ripe. And the leaves of the red raspberry are used to make a tea for when a woman is about to deliver About 2 weeks before the baby is due, she can drink some tea from the red raspberry leaves, and this will make the birth much easier. I know of 3 different people who have tried this. One gave birth in 30 minutes after the labor pains started, and another in an hour and a half, and another in an hour. And they said it was so easy that they couldn't believe it. So red raspberry leaves are very good for that purpose. You just pick the leaves from the young plants like this, the young leaves, and dry them and put them away for making tea with. Just take a couple of heaping teaspoons of the dried leaves that have been chopped. When you make your tea from raspberry leaves, the effect is of a mild diuretic, and of course the leaves are green, and so anytime you make tea from something that's green, it's nutritious. This is black locust. In the early spring, there's clusters of white, sweet pea-shaped blooms that are very fragrant, has the flavor of wisteria almost, and they're very good for making fritters. Just dip the sections of bloom into a light pancake batter and saute them. Very delicious. Here's an interesting plant. This is called river cane, and you can see it's a member of the bamboo family, which is a form of grass. Most bamboos are tall grasses, and the Cherokees used the stems of this to make baskets. They would split the stems and scrape them to make them even, and then weave some really good baskets from them. And so this was a very utilitarian plant for the Cherokees. They used other types of bamboo for the same thing, and of course bamboo shoots are edible. They can come up in the spring at the base of the plants, and you just dig down a few inches into the ground and cut the shoot off, and you can eat them raw or steam them or cook them in some way. And of course they taste a little bit different from the bamboo shoots that you buy canned, which are somewhat bitter. But this grows along river banks, and of course a lot of the Cherokee villages were done on river banks for the source of water. And a lot of times the villages and the mounds that you see in some areas were built where 2 streams converge. And this is because those areas are power points, and so the Cherokees were very aware of power points and the benefits that they could derive from being in an area like this. And so again, it's a very useful plant and made beautiful baskets, and a lot of people have antique baskets made from this in their collections. Okay, we're checking out grass today. Here's some fresh green grass coming up from where some hay, spoil hay, was spread out. And this is January. Earlier on, the grass was coming up and at a good point for eating, but this is very nutritious. It's loaded with vitamins, minerals, and whenever you eat greens like this, your body makes its own protein, and that's where all that butter fat milk comes from when a cow eats grass. Some people think grass isn't very nutritious, but when you get it in the new stage like this, as it just comes up from the seed, it's very tender, it's very sweet, and some people use wheatgrass and juice it to drink the juice, but this is even better than wheatgrass because the wheatgrass can be a little bit tougher than this and more fibrous, but fresh green grass, just what comes up from hay, is very edible.
Sweet.
bit of oil in the pan. Vegetable oil works good. Okay. This is the poke after it's been parboiled, water poured off twice. And so it's most of the active ingredients have been removed. And then we put it in the frying pan and chop it up, and it'll be fried slightly. Chop it up a bit. We break an egg into it. Add a little bit of salt to the egg and to the poke to suit your taste. Whip up a couple of eggs. And add that to the mix. This takes about 6 minutes generally to stir fry the poke after it's been parboiled. And you can sprinkle in some pumpkin seeds or sunflower seeds, which is what I'm using here, and this adds some extra flavor and protein to it. Okay, to give you an idea of the food value of poke, this is commonly called Polk Sallet, S-A-L-L-E-T, not salad, and it's a food of the South. And it is an excellent spring tonic and laxative. And the people in the South, especially in the country, would eat some of this, pick it when the shoots are coming up, first thing in the spring, fix 2 or 3 meals of it like this, and it cleans you out all the toxins and stuff that you built up through the winter. And so it's an excellent spring tonic and cleanser. And it also has a very delicious flavor. Most people who try this for the first time can't believe how delicious it is. It has a little bit of similarity to the flavor of asparagus, but still it's totally different from any green that you'll find. And at this point, it's ready to eat. Okay, this is James Ferranti. He's my apprentice on herbs, and he helps collect a lot of things. And so he's going to be talking about some of the herbs here that is being used. Field sorrel is the one we're covering right now. So. Okay, as far as the nutrition goes on these items, the sorrel, of course, has a sour taste, which means it has a lot of vitamin C in it, both of these, vitamin C, whereas the clover is a legume, and so it has some of the same elements that you would find in beans. And anytime you eat something green, your body makes its own protein from it. And green foods are also cleansing foods. And then the chickweed, being green too, also has vitamin C, E, and the green food value to it. And so all these are extremely healthy, and they are also blood cleansers at the same time. And so when you eat things like this, you're also cleansing your body. Simple salad dressing using concentrated tomato juice as the base. We can add, instead of salt, either some soy sauce, or this is liquid aminos, which provides you with lots of amino acids plus a salty flavor. A little bit of that in. And a little balsamic vinegar. And this also has the juice of half of a lime. Next, I'm going to add a little bit of parsley leaves. A touch of Italian seasoning. Some Old Bay seasoning, favorite in Louisiana, and then a touch of lemon pepper, and that provides the outside flavors for our dressing. After we get all the ingredients in our container, we just shake it up, blend everything together, and that's all it takes. There it is. Alright, here's our lunch all laid out. Their hand-picked salad right out of the meadows. And here we have some shoots from greenbrier, which a lot of people think is a nuisance, but the shoots that come out in the spring like this are tender and tasty and very nutritious. We have some dandelion greens. We add a little bit of spinach to this. We also have chickweed, some clover blooms, some sweet clover, some sheep sorrel, and field sorrel also. And we have, this is the Polk Sallet, and it's parboiled twice before it's fried with a little bit of egg stir-fried in it, and we've added some sunflower seeds also for extra flavor and crunchiness. And so you can see it makes a beautiful salad, and when you pick things out wild like this, it's free. It's very nutritious, and most of these items we have included are cleansers, so you get your body cleansed at the same time, and you'll be amazed at how good you feel after you've eaten something like this. It's fresh and raw, and you'll be bright-eyed. You'll be able to see better than you did before, and you'll notice a distinct difference. So let's get started eating. Enjoy.